Every now and then an autistic advocate will say something that's kind of out of pocket and we'll all have a bit of a discourse about it. And recently that discourse was focused on a YouTube video called Deconstructing the Neurotypical versus Neurodivergent Gaze. I watched the video to see what all the fuss was about, as you do, and I did indeed see what all the fuss was about. I have thoughts, big thoughts that the internet needs to hear. But this video is not about that creator. It's not even a response video to that video. Do not go and find her. Do not go and leave her comments because you watched this. I will honestly hate you forever if you do. I usually only respond to videos that have more like 1 million views, and as of now, this one doesn't even have 100,000 views, so this is not a response video. This video is here to ask and hopefully answer a couple of questions. When can we meaningfully, helpfully discuss the difference between neurotypicals and neurodivergents, and when does doing so cause harm? If you're new here, hey up, I'm Ember and I make video essays about autism and neurodiversity and disability all through an anti-capitalist lens. I'm autistic, I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome and POTS, and probably also ADHD, but I haven't been assessed for that yet because if I have to make one more appointment with a specialist, I'm going to scream. Welcome! So what's a gaze? When people talk about a gaze, they might mean different things. Predominantly, there's the idea of a gaze being the consequence of power structures. Through most of what I've read about different kinds of gaze, power dynamics have been at the centre of the conversation. The gazer holds power over the subject of the gaze. The subject of the gaze. It's like a fascist essay title. So be it the way that we might self-centre a la Foucault's panopticon. I love a panopticon. Like, I'm fascinated by panopticons for some reason. Like, never really knowing if you're being watched and so just assuming that you are. It's a really interesting way to think about how society works and power structures within it. You know, I think that Foucault guy was really onto something there. The social norms of our society will cause us to subconsciously conform. Gaze is talked about in terms of being a person of colour in a white supremacist society, being queer in an environment that doesn't accept you. It's to do with code switching. That need to change your behaviour when you're being observed by people who demand a certain performance. I think there's a lot to say about the neurotypical gaze as it pertains to autistic masking. The pressure to act in ways that you might even find very uncomfortable for your social and sometimes literal survival. And this can bleed into our alone time too, when you catch yourself suppressing your stims or painting an expression onto your face when you're perfectly alone. Psychologists sometimes talk about gaze as it pertains to childhood development. When a child first encounters mirrors and learns how they're perceived from the outside, they're suddenly placed outside of themselves. It creates a new feeling of being observed. Sometimes a consequence of trauma is the feeling that you're always under someone's gaze, an imaginary audience, because maybe you had to predict the behaviour and emotions of another person and then change your behaviour and emotions accordingly. Again, self-censorship for survival. The male gaze is a term coined to describe the role of women in art. For centuries, men have depicted women as passive objects, there for the desires and entertainment of men. Art made in the male gaze only depicts men as active agents within the world. Women are simply available to them. In Renaissance paintings, the nude young woman laid down, emotionless, beckoning sometimes to the viewer. She has no personality, no action within her, no motivation, no awareness of anything other than being the object of a gaze. And this ubiquity of the male gaze across media for centuries has undoubtedly impacted the psychology of individuals. In his documentary series, Ways of Seeing, John Berger? Anyway, he interviews this group of 5 women, white women, I should say, and asks them how they feel about all these Renaissance paintings of nude women after looking at it through the lens of a male gaze.
From adolescence on, if I've seen myself naked in the mirror, I have not thought of myself as naked, I have thought of myself as a nude. And I think this comes very largely from having been trailed around all the major art galleries in adolescence. You know, this is culture, this is beauty, with a capital B.
And then there is the more recently proposed idea of a female gaze, which takes some different forms. Like, there's a few different ideas about that. But the thing it definitely is not is a role reversal of the male gaze. Women objectifying men is not the female gaze. Rather, director Joey Soloway describes art which is there to overturn the idea of an object-viewer dichotomy. Art which centres the autonomy, feelings and motivations of a subject rather than an object of your gaze, which breaks down the barrier between audience and subject and creator. Art that makes you feel along with it, rather than art onto which you can simply project your own desires. So what could a neurodivergent gaze be? If we understand a gaze through power dynamics, then to me, art made in the neurodivergent gaze would be art that overturns elements of existing art which perpetuate social structures in which neurodivergent people are objectified, infantilized, and treated as accessories. It would be art that centres a neurodivergent experience, warts and all, and drags the viewer into that experience. Art like that exists, but it's few and far between. To me, art made in an autistic gaze would be art made by an autistic person about autism, which does not in any way centre an holistic audience, made to show autistic motivations and experiences as they are, not as they appear to be. Art which doesn't explain autism so that holistic people can understand it, but which is simply autistic. Art like that exists, but again, few and far between. Various writers of colour have talked about the white gaze, in which they are constantly aware that their work is going to be judged by a predominantly white audience, and so they self-censor things which they might have otherwise included. Centering the emotions and responses of the majority group is always going to stifle the expression of minorities. From my reading, I haven't seen anyone talking about a gaze in terms of like just things that people like. At least not anyone serious. Seen a few TikToks though.
I can explain the difference between the male gaze and the female gaze to you in 2 pictures. The male gaze, the female gaze. On the left, they have a physical barrier between themselves and the voyeur, which creates a much more intimidating, standoffish vibe, versus on the right, they have a much more open posture, which gives this vibe of approachability and safeness and comfort, which is much more female gaze because these are already big, tough-looking dudes. Like, we have the more minute details, like Geralt's chest hair being visible, female, sleeves rolled up, female, long hair for the ladies. When they look a little dirty, ladies. When they're sweaty, ladies.
So I thought it'd be really fun to start a series where I take one piece of clothing and dress it for the female gaze versus the male gaze. Okay, I actually think this turned out really cute. The blues match each other really well. Then I added this white button up for more coverage, a brown bag, and some brown shoes. Now let's make this male gaze. Okay, now for the male gaze.
Don't look at me with those eyes.
What eyes? What are the things that define the female gaze? Like, what are the things that are like women, like this is like what they love about men?
The male and female gazes aren't just lists of things that men and women like. And frankly, I'm pretty astonished that in 2024 we're trying to make lists of things that men and women like. And so, in my opinion, doing the same thing, but with neurotypical in place of male and neurodivergent in place of female, it's not going to be the most helpful conversation anyone's ever had. Neurodivergent gaze is anime t-shirts and blue hair, a fantasy book collection, plushies, dungarees, headphones, figurine collections, not caring what other people think, and being the quirkiest and wackiest of them all. And neurotypical gaze is beige, hair straighteners, nightclubs, having a career and a friendship group, gardening, and being a bland, boring, materialistic conformist. You can't tell someone's neurotype based on the things they like, and even less by their aesthetic. It's not that there's like exceptions to the rule, there are no rules. Nor can you tell someone's neurotype based on how nice they are or not, nor can you tell how nice someone is or not based on the colour of their hair. The thumbnail of the video everyone's talking about shows two kinds of styles. A minimalist look, characterised by single colours, body-hugging, mostly low-cut outfits, worn by women who are posing for the camera in suggestive ways on one side, supposedly illustrating the neurotypical gaze, and on the other, neurodivergent side, bright colours, no cleavage, dyed hair, clashing combos, high-concept looks, non-suggestive poses. Lots of other autistic people have commented to say that they dress much more in line with this supposed neurotypical style and for very autistic reasons, and I'd have to chime in. I prefer to wear very basic items in single colours. My wardrobe consists of about 6 or 7 colours, but mostly all of my stuff is black or grey or white. And recently I've got really into beige, because that also goes with black and white. You know, for days when I want to spice things up and have an alternative to the grey. I want a wardrobe where everything goes with everything, because a lot of the time my executive functioning is in the bin, and thinking about what to wear is just too much. But also, I want to look like I've kind of made some effort, because that makes me feel more confident and able to do things like answer the door or spontaneously go for a walk. It makes me feel better when I catch myself in the mirror, and honestly, I'm just really fucking picky about colour combinations. There was this TV host on the other day, and she had on this dark green, like this deep sort of forest green, shiny faux leather skirt paired with a bright, almost neon yellow blouse. It made me angry. I couldn't get over it. Every time she popped up, I got all irate. Most of my clothes are as comfortable as possible and as easy to get into and wear as possible. Seriously, my wardrobe could just like replace the basic section in any store. I have a lot of sensory issues and I get really sensitive skin, and that all can like fluctuate wildly, and so complicated clothes like the ones pictured on the right are nothing that I would ever choose. Like, don't get me wrong, I think they all look great, but I think all the people on the thumbnail look great. But you'd never catch me going out in overalls, because using public bathrooms is horrible enough, thank you. I don't need to be rolling my entire outfit down. What if it touches the floor? Or worse, the underside of the toilet bowl, which I know nobody ever cleans properly. But one of the points of this conversation and that video that really did stick out to me was the description of that style being kind of high maintenance, and you must only really care about your appearance. You must be quite superficial to put all of that effort in. They're just at home. Why are they wearing makeup? And an
example of that is Let's say I'm going out to the grocery store and I see a woman wearing a really tight, short dress with high heels on, a bunch of makeup, and her hair did. I'm not necessarily judging that she's doing that, but it says a lot about a person when they're putting that much effort to appeal to the male gaze, especially in situations that don't call for it. There's so many more examples I could think of, like going camping or going to the movies or any sort of more casual activity, and then a person is wearing very uncomfortable clothes where their temperature is not going to be well regulated, their body is not going to be comfortable, their skin's not able to breathe properly, or they had to put hours into the hair and makeup, and there's no practicality to any of it, but they look good. That kind of shows a lot about a person's value system. Yes, it's completely normal and okay to care about what you look like, what you're wearing, and how you're presenting yourself and how you're expressing yourself. But it should never come at the cost of your ability to fully experience the experience.
Hair does not stay that pink by itself. But the point is that you don't ever know how someone is experiencing something from the outside. Like, you might think that those clothes are uncomfortable or taking away from the experience, but that person might be far more comfortable in those clothes than they would be in joggers and a sweatshirt. A while back, there was this meme thing going around about, like, what do you wear when you sleep? And I joked that, like, I don't understand anyone who would sleep in a bra. Like, to me, that's the most uncomfortable option. I can't imagine it. And a good friend of mine gently called me in to tell me that, you know, some trans women might sleep in their bra because it helps them with their dysphoria. And then the more I thought about it, I realised that people with bigger breasts than me might also sleep in their bras because they'd still need that support during the night. Something that would be incredibly uncomfortable for me might make other people far more comfortable. So I deleted the post because that's an option. Autistic and otherwise neurodivergent people are often judged for our needs. They're often deemed to be unnecessary, that we're just being dramatic and sensitive. Like, how could you be so uncomfortable in this place where everyone else is fine? But you can never know how somebody else feels in their own skin. And you should never just project your own preferences onto them and then judge them for not sharing those preferences. And honestly, it's literally just misogyny to see a woman in a supermarket with lots of makeup on and nice clothes and just assume that she's dressing for the male gaze. I really am trying not to make a response video, I'm sorry. But the distinction is supposedly in the fact that these people are dressing like this despite what people think. That they are expressing their authentic, true selves. Whereas women dressing like this are simply conforming to a male gaze and a beauty standard. But if you think about it just a little bit, women who dress like that are also dressing like that despite what people think. It's not like nobody is judging their choices, is it? I see absolutely no reason why one side is expressing their true authentic selves and the other is not. How do we know that this isn't authentically who these people are? That they aren't dressing that way entirely for themselves because those are the clothes that they love, even when they're on their own. And in my opinion, it's an awful lot more superficial to judge people based on what clothes they're wearing than to dress in a way that you think other people would like. Like, even if someone is always chasing after fashions and trends, that still doesn't take anything away from the authenticity of their choices. People can appreciate the art form of fashion, the hard work of designers, the excitement of new collections, the fun of a different palette, perfectly authentically and entirely for themselves and their own pleasure. I don't think we should even slightly lean into the idea that we can assume things about a person based on their clothes. Like, not even a little bit. I don't think it's ever helpful. It's never interesting. I don't think a quick caveat of, I know I'm generalizing here, but is enough. The creator and some of the TikToks that she shows talks about a mean girl versus a nice girl aesthetic, and how this basically can just translate into neurotypical versus neurodivergent aesthetic. And that already implies some kind of value judgment, like mean versus nice. Before I move on to how we should and should not talk about neurotypicality, I want to focus a little bit on this point of authenticity. Throughout that video, but also across so much of neurodivergent content, this idea of our true authentic self comes up an awful lot. Neurodivergent people are more authentic, neurotypical people only do things because other people do, you know. Oh, and by the way, if you're blessed enough to have never heard people say this stuff, instead of writing me a comment to tell me like, oh, I've never heard anyone say that, just type those words into a search bar anywhere. I'm not making it up. Wish I was. You can even just go into the comment section of that video. So part of me kind of blames the prevalence of therapy speak in online spaces, phrases and words which are very useful in certain contexts but which have been extrapolated into nothingness. Words like trauma and boundaries. But what does it actually mean for a person to be more or less authentically themselves? And are neurodivergent people more or less likely to be authentically themselves? I think probably not. At least if we are to assume that there is such a thing as your authentic self, which I don't. I actually think that minority groups are far more likely to try and change parts of themselves to fit in for safety. But I think that those who hold power in this world, well, they're just fully transparently doing whatever they want to do, saying whatever they want to say, whenever they want to. But I don't think that there is some entity which is the authentic me. I think people and identities are mostly fluid and changeable and always constantly prone to environmental influence. This is something else I talk a lot about on my channel if you're interested. And if all that sounds a bit wacky to you, then do watch some of my other videos on it and look into things like philosophical theories of self, because there's a load of them. I'm not alone. But whether you think neurodivergent people are more likely to be authentic or not, we don't hold a monopoly on authenticity. I think it's probably not great to imply that autistic people face social struggles because everyone else is simply afraid of our authenticity. What's the matter? Too authentic for you? So you know when people say oh, just be yourself? To me, all that means is just do whatever feels natural in the moment. Don't think too much. Don't put too much thought into how you're appearing in the world. Just be. It's my opinion that these people are putting some amount of thought into how they appear in the world. And that's fine. Good even. I don't know. They all are. All the people on that thumbnail are putting some effort in, changing their appearance to fit into some kind of ideal that they have. I think it's forcing a distinction to assume that one style is just doing that only for themselves and the other kind is doing it just for other people. That seems like something you just made up. So I guess you could say that the people on the more colourful side of the picture, that their appearance isn't going to be widely accepted. Although, you know what, now I think about it, I put this in the script, but the other side of the picture, that's not going to be widely accepted either, is it? I mean, I don't know, you're going to get some looks still if you go into the supermarket dressed like this. But no, still, you might say that they are expressing something about themselves which society might shun. I get it, because I used to be a goth kid in 2001. I had grown adults shout abuse at me in the streets. I was followed by groups of other kids. I was physically assaulted. I had people say the most horrendous things directly to my face because of my clothes and makeup. I was called satanic by this street preacher once while I was out Christmas shopping for my friends and family. So satanic. I faced violence due to my fashion choices, but they were choices. And they were choices which were absolutely influenced by the culture, by other people, by the general vibe of the alternative scene back then. I remember this conversation that happened between my mum and my uncle. My uncle was like an old school punk, like he was going to see Ramones and Buzzcock shows like in the late 70s. And my mum was like talking about me and my friends, about how alternative and unique and quirky we all were, how like in our small town back home we all stood out like a sore thumb. And like my uncle was kind of like rolling his eyes at this, and he said like, well, yeah, okay, but it's still a fashion. It's still just following a fashion. And like I remember my mum kind of jumped to my defense and said, no, they're actually really quite unique. But I agreed with my uncle. He was right. I look just like everyone else at Download Festival. In fact, I kind of dressed that way to fit in with certain people, to signal to others who might have stuff in common with me that maybe we could be friends. Roar.
I like it, metalheads, when they wear their favorite shirts. It's like, I know it's not show and tell, but this is a band that I like. Do you like something that I like? That's what it is. We're signaling to be like, maybe you are an anxious human being as well. Maybe you enjoy it when someone goes, fuck!
And these days, with the rise of the aesthetic, if we are to call this the neurodivergent aesthetic, then doesn't that just make it like any other? Just a fashion for people to follow? My hot take is to just let people wear what they want and that it isn't interesting at all to go analysing it. It seems like astrology to me. It's not worth anyone's time to make up assumptions about what a hairstyle says about a person. It's just silly.
I trust any woman or person that look like this. If they got this signature blue hair and the glasses, I automatically feel safe with them. I don't know what it is.
Okay, so is it ever okay to talk about neurotypical people and neurodivergent people in very generalized ways? Before I answer, let me define my terms like a proper little essayist. I made a video about this, which you can watch, but essentially I use neurodivergent to mean anyone with a brain-based disability. Clinically, technically, neurodivergent excludes things like depression and brain injury. But personally, I think that that distinction is unwarranted when it comes to non-clinical use. Somebody who has lived with chronic depression will have a differently structured brain than somebody who has not, and this would show up on certain kinds of brain scans. The changes caused to our neurology from chronic stress, anxiety, PTSD, or depression are physical. It changes how your brain functions. It changes how you experience the world. I understand the need for more stricter distinctions if you're a doctor or a psychiatrist or something, but in terms of the neurodiversity movement, a civil rights movement, a social justice movement there to protect and expand the rights of neurodivergent people, I think we share struggles. Those of us with autism or learning disabilities and those of us with anxiety and PTSD, we share a fight and we ought to have solidarity with one another. Neurotypical, as far as I use it, means somebody who does not have a brain-based disability, that nothing about their neurology consistently limits them or negatively impacts their ability to function and thrive within society. So I have and will continue to use these terms in generalized ways. Examples include: neurodivergent people might struggle to acquire or hold down a job. Neurodivergent people are often judged unfairly. Neurodivergent people face discrimination. Or, typical people might struggle to empathize with our experiences. Or, neurotypical people rarely have to think about stuff that impacts us a lot. It can be done, and often should be done. But, right, I think that it is impossible to know if somebody is neurotypical without asking them. I'm astonished every time I see a neurodivergent creator talking as if you can just tell by looking if someone's neurotypical. So you can tell just from the outside if someone's got dyspraxia or OCD. Is there an epilepsy aesthetic you're picking up on? I do think that often autistic people can tell if somebody else is autistic, but I still think it's kind of absurd to imply that you can just intuit the neurology of strangers. And also, if I mean autistic, I say autistic. The video we're not talking about absolutely uses neurodivergent as just a synonym for autistic. But so do lots of people. It's a common complaint by otherwise neurodivergent people that they feel alienated from the mainstream neurodiversity movement because people keep using neurodivergent as a synonym for autistic and sometimes ADHD. That, in my opinion, is directly harmful to the community. We need solidarity. No neurodivergent person should think that they don't have a place within conversations about neurodiversity. And we can have conversations specifically about autism and ADHD whenever we want. People with other neurodivergencies might not face the same social struggles as autistic people. They might face other kinds, but there are few neurotypes out there that are characterized by the same kinds of social, emotional, and communication issues as autism is. Only a handful of other neurotypes involve sensory processing issues. Only a handful involve attention differences. There is crossover, shared struggles, as I've just said, and there are people with multiple neurodivergencies. But there are only a handful of things that can be said about all neurodivergent people, and fashion choices isn't one of them. Okay, I do think that neurodivergent people, like all oppressed minorities, are maybe more likely to be less judgmental of other people, maybe more open towards other modes of being, just from the experience of themselves being misunderstood. Maybe. Sometimes. But it depends, and it's not something we can count on. There are a lot of very unsafe neurodivergent and disabled people out there. And being a victim of oppression can swing the other way too, can turn you into a pretty judgmental and bitter person. Incel groups and forums like 8chan. I mean, let's not pretend that there's not a bunch of neurodivergent people running those places. Young people who have been isolated, bullied, judged, who might have faced violence due to who they are, due to some immutable characteristic that might teach them the importance of compassion, but they might also try to get themselves into a position in which they can no longer be a victim, a position of power over others. If you're hurting them, they can't hurt you. We are not more wholesome or compassionate or authentic or non-judgmental as a group. Nor are we more bitter and vengeful. But that video was one of the more judgmental things I've seen in a while. But again, that kind of thing is becoming pretty standard in certain corners of autism advocacy. I'm not going after that creator. She's just going a little bit viral at the minute for doing something that countless others have been doing for ages. And just particularly for me at the minute, it's a bit of a bugbear. I'm currently working on a feature-length essay/documentary thing about aspy supremacy. That's a term which originally referred to the idea that those who had been diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, that they were different from and superior to those who had an autism diagnosis. The definition of the phrase has evolved in recent years, and now it has come to represent the idea that autistic people are superior to all other people. It takes many forms, and I will explore them all in that video. But for now, you don't really have to be on autism TikTok for very long before you start to learn that we're more intelligent, certainly more logical. We're more ethical, and we don't fall for things like propaganda and advertising. We're more authentic and truthful, more trustworthy and dependable than neurotypical people. Neurotypical people lie all the time. They never say what they mean. They only care about appearance and what other people think of them. They just want to conform with society, and they can't recognize patterns, so they don't know that bad things are bad. They don't think. They just monkey see, monkey do. They don't value the right things. They're shallow, and they love small talk. And they get scared if you try to talk to them about something that actually matters. Please! It's not just that all of that is completely factually inaccurate. It's not just because it's actually quite infantilizing to talk about autistic people as if we're these pure and innocent beings. And it is certainly not because I feel sorry for the neurotypical bots of autistic jokes. And it's not even because most aspy supremacy talking points is just eugenics repackaged. No, I think it puts young autistic people into harm's way. Imagine thinking that most of the world's people are dangerously stupid liars who hate you. I can't help but think that it only primes already vulnerable people into being abused and exploited by predators. You can't trust anyone neurotypical. Not even your own family members. They will never be able to empathize with you. They are incapable. They will always judge you. You can't trust them. But you can trust me, because I'm like you. In my opinion, a lot of the anti-neurotypical vitriol might simply create a group of vulnerable young people who predators, extremists, and cultists will view as pre-primed targets. It further isolates the already isolated, and isolation is always dangerous. I'm not talking about jokes. I'm not here telling you off about making some light-hearted jokes about the neurotypicals. I think it's very funny, actually, when we turn the tables and when we talk about, like, neurotypical behavior in the same pathologizing kind of language that autistic behavior is described as. That serves a purpose. It shows how unreasonable and offensive the mainstream discussion around autism actually is. It can be educational. Like, you wouldn't like it. You wouldn't like it if people were talking about your normal, natural modes of being as if that's signals that something's wrong with you. So don't talk about other people like that. The absurdity is implied. It's not supposed to be taken literally. We don't want to be discussed through a pathologizing lens because it's inaccurate and cruel and extremely harmful. And unfortunately, sometimes you do need to turn those tables to show people exactly how unfair and silly and absurd the way they're talking about other people is. But you're not helping neurodivergent people get to know themselves if you're speaking in generalities. In fact, you're much more likely to alienate neurodivergent people who don't fit into your binary assumptions. Talking about yourself, now that can really help people. That can help people feel not alone, understood, seen. And then anyone who's different from you, who doesn't relate, can simply just learn about other people. Even talking as if all autistic people have sensory processing issues or special interests is alienating and potentially harmful. Many of us do not, and neither thing is necessary for a diagnosis of autism. I talk about this kind of stuff a lot on my channel. It's a bit of a theme. But it is never my intent to go after or attack other autistic people. Honestly, even autistic people who I see as doing harmful things, because honestly, I think there's a lot more harm being done, and that has been done by mainstream media, medical and psychological establishments, big holistic ran organizations and charities, researchers or autism parent advocates who opt to talk over and for autistic people instead of listening to us. I think on the scale of things, the harm done by the TikTokers is somewhat negligible, but it is my intent to correct misinformation. It is my intent to counter harmful, dangerous ideas when I see them, to provide alternative concepts and ways of thinking that go beyond binaries and hierarchies. If the neurodiversity movement can teach us anything, it must be that there are as many different modes of being in this world as there are people. No two people are the same. If you've met one autistic, you've met one autistic. It is an anti-essentialist struggle. It is a fight against a hierarchical view of human nature. The last thing that we should ever do is eject essentialism and hierarchy into our discussions and praxis. The neurodiversity movement is here to tear down barriers, not reinforce them. Okay, like the video if you liked the video, and if you didn't like the video, what's the matter? Too authentic for ya! Subscribe for more, follow me in other places, and if you really like what you see, I have a Patreon which keeps this channel ticking over and has done for almost 5 years. Thank you, patrons, I love you, goodbye.